Okay, I will call the October 17th, 2023 Committee of the Meeting to order, and I will begin with a land acknowledgement that the City of Fort Saskatchewan is located within Treaty 6 territory in Métis Nation of Alberta Region 4, the ancestral and traditional territory of the Nihilwak, Dene, Blackfoot, Saulteaux, Nakota Sioux, and Métis. And we acknowledge the many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit whose footsteps have marked these lands for generations, and it is because of our treaty relationship that we can live, work, and play on Treaty 6 territory. All right, so the first item on the agenda is approval of the September 19th, 2023 Committee of the Whole meeting minutes. Councillor Harris.
I would so move that Council approve the meeting minutes of the meeting of Tuesday, September the 18th.
All right, thank you. Are there any errors or omissions? Not seeing anybody weighing in on that. I will close the motion. Please cast your vote. Oh, sorry. Okay.
We're just waiting on Councillor Abutoye.
If it's not coming up, Councillor Abutoye, just...
I voted in favor.
Okay, thank you. And that is carried. Thank you very much. At this time, I will ask if there's anybody present who wishes to speak as part of a delegation for any of the items that are on the agenda. And I don't believe there's anybody in the audience, so we will move right along. And the first item that we have is the ATCO presentation. Greg Caldwell from ATCO, Director of Utility Hydrant Strategy. And we have 15 minutes set up for this.
I think I'm on now. Well, nice seeing everyone, and thank you for having us. Patrick Bain, who is my colleague, and I think he's met with some of you before, gives his regard.
Can you pull the mic just a little closer?
Sure. Can you hear me better now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Gives his regards as he's traveling in a way, so he was hoping to be here as well, but unable to attend. So I know I only have 15 minutes. I'll try and get through this in less than that so that there's time for as many questions as you may have. Why are we doing this? And there could be public here as well that are interested, and I want to get back to what's happening in our world, which is we continue to see evolution in not only climate policy, but in what energies will we use in the future, and how will we continue to decarbonize our really immense energy networks, not only in Alberta, but internationally. And the thing that I would like to push or maybe highlight in this slide is balancing affordability with the pace of decarbonization. I think it's not lost on anyone in this room that we have a significant affordability issue in not only Fort Saskatchewan, but in Canada. And also we have emission reduction targets and climate policy we're trying to balance with that. And I think a lot of times the discussion publicly only focuses on emissions and doesn't bring in those other pieces. And what we're trying to show, not only through this project, but through the hydrogen program, is that there's a way to do both, which is start the process of decarbonization or emission reduction, but also balance affordability. And so I'll just leave you there on this slide and get into the update. Again, nothing has changed in the number of customers or the area or the type of customers that we're doing. And blending into in this city. What I can say is we are still only blending at 5%. We hope to go to 20%, but we are waiting on a decision from the Canadian Standards Association. That is what's held us up. You may remember last year we had a challenge with them, started in November of 2022. We have since resolved that. We can blend at 5% with no issue, but we do not have the go-ahead from them to blend at 20%, so we're working on that. And happy to answer questions on that, because I did want to say, like, we presented to you in the past, the plan is to go up to 20%. And so not there yet, but hopefully in 2024, we will have some resolution to that. We do have a plan to continue post-commissioning verifications. The big thing on that is we're going to do just some random appliance checks throughout this winter, where we'll show up to customer homes, and assuming they let us in, we will. They generally do. We'll just do some appliance checks. We also have a plan in 2024 to pull some of the meters out of service and just make sure they're metering accurately. We don't expect any issues, but we're just doing it because if we don't check, we don't know. And there will be a survey going out to all customers as well. We continue to leak survey the area at a much higher rate than any other normal area would get, and we haven't found anything. Any additional leaks from what was already there before the project. And when I say what was already there, I don't mean that we have substantial leaks of any kinds, but you can find sometimes pinhole leaks even on a meter set, just because the meter sets move with the freeze thaw and stuff like that. So there's nothing substantial that we've found at all. This is a busy slide. If I can take you to the bottom left of the slide where it says pyrolysis partnerships. We are, as we speak, the University of British Columbia has a company called Vulcanex that's building a pyrolysis project. And you might be saying, what's pyrolysis? Pyrolysis is where you take the natural gas and you actually crack it, either putting it through sometimes they use laser or electrical beams, or in this case, they actually use a liquid metal that they pass the natural gas through, and out comes hydrogen and solid carbon. So you don't need the traditional carbon capture infrastructure, the pipes, the compression, injecting it underground. You actually have a solid carbon. There's one commercial pyrolysis plant in the world. It's in the United States. It's a company called Monolith, if you want to Google it. We believe that for hydrogen to really take off at scale, and I get asked often, like, okay, you're doing this project in Fort Saskatchewan or Edmonton, that's great for them, but what about for my community and some rural part of Alberta? And we believe pyrolysis could really support not only keeping costs down, but also creating a way for them to participate in this. And so I don't want to get too much into it, but I want to say that we're building the plant as we speak at the blending location, and when it's up and running, it'd be great to have you all out to come see it. That plant is right beside the Fort Saskatchewan Operating Center, so I'm actually going to skip to this slide here really quick. So you see the operating center. There's the blending site to the right of that. And then the plant, the methane pyrolysis plant, is actually going in that empty space. So that just so you can envision where it will all be. I think most of you have been out there or you're familiar with the site. But I'm just going to jump back now. This center will be up and running, I will say Q1 of 2024. The construction's largely complete, and we're just doing the finishings inside the building. What is unique about this building, and I think what is interesting for your community, is not only will it be the first commercial building in North America running on pure hydrogen, and that's like really the differentiator here, but our staff will be working out of there. And you see all the different colored pipes on the wall. So if there's an appliance manufacturer of some kind, or an end use of some kind that someone wants to test or demonstrate in that building, whether it runs on pure natural gas or a blend of hydrogen or pure hydrogen, that's all available there. So the building is meant to be public. It will be open to the public, and whether we bring students in or other stakeholders, whether it's government or some other group, it's really meant to be. It's not. There's not going to be a lot of security to get people in or anything like that. It'll be something that we can highlight and hopefully bring a lot of people into the community. And it is a working office for our staff, and I shouldn't say operations center. Like our actual operators will be located there. Just finally, like, what are the next steps? Like the blending project is a demonstration project. Again, very thankful that your community has allowed us to be here and get started with that. But what's next? And I have a video that follows this. It's 90 seconds long. But the key, what we're saying to government and what we're trying to sell people on who don't maybe have an interest or say, like, why should I care about hydrogen in Alberta? There is at least $25 billion in projects that have been announced that where hydrogen is the key focus. They want to produce low carbon hydrogen. But the real question that people don't talk about a lot is, like, who are the customers for this energy? And in some cases, it's your traditional petrochemical plants, like what Dow is doing or what ATCO is working on with Suncor. But to have a hydrogen economy, you need customers, and to have customers, you need to be able to move the energy to them. And so what we're trying to say to government is, look, we need some legislative change so that we can build pipes in the region broadly, move the energy to these customers, whether it's blending, whether it's pure hydrogen end use, whether it's transportation. The video will get into that to really create this new economy. So I'm just going to jump to the video. It's my last slide, and then we can get right into questions.
The Edmonton region is a global giant in hydrogen production, producing and consuming approximately 89 gigawatt hours of hydrogen per day. This is the largest regional production in Canada and represents enough production to heat every home in Edmonton. Industrial, Indigenous, economic development, and policy leaders are working together to kickstart the region's future hydrogen economy, supporting investment and job growth while working towards a prosperous carbon-neutral future. We've already built and commissioned the largest hydrogen blending project in North America, are opening North America's first 100% commercial hydrogen building, have announced the study on a first-of-its-kind 100% pure hydrogen community, and the Edmonton Region Hydrogen Hub has kicked off the first 5,000 hydrogen vehicle challenge in Canada. ATCO is keen to build the infrastructure to support this transition, shifting concepts and innovations to reality. A foundational pipeline will enable large-scale hydrogen blending across the Edmonton region, commercial pure hydrogen end use, and large-scale refueling. Simultaneously, ATCO, the City of Edmonton, and Strathcona County are collaborating with industrial customers, transit, trucking, healthcare campuses, and airports to prepare for a carbon-neutral energy system of the future.
So that's my last slide. I hope I haven't used too much time, and we'll just go to Q&A.
No, you have
The Edmonton region
Sorry.
is a global...
Thanks.
You have lots of time. Thank you very much. That was an excellent presentation. I'm going to go to some questions of council, and then I'll finish up. Councillor Harris, you're first.
That was great. It's good to see how things have evolved over time. Obviously, reflecting back, we're glad to see you moving in the right direction. So can you kind of refresh my memory? How many homes are we dealing with in the Southford area? Are you currently you're sending to, if I read things properly? And what did they have to do by way of adjustments to their heating, water heating sort of stuff to use a blend of hydrogen and natural gas? And who paid for that?
Okay, so 2,100 customers, predominantly homes. There is a school in there, but predominantly residential, a few commercial customers, I believe. They didn't have to do anything to adjust hot water tanks, furnaces, anything. Yeah, like nothing. What we did is we inspected them just purely. I mean, I remember sharing with you folks. We just did it to build rapport with customers, to build trust, but to make sure there was no pre-existing issues with any appliances. But we don't have to adjust anything up to a 20% blend, and that's why that's been the limit to what we said we'll go to. If we're doing a pure hydrogen community, that's new appliances, and that's why we want to build something like that from scratch versus having to go in and change. The other thing is if I come to your home and say, we're giving you pure hydrogen, you're getting new appliances, you might say, no, you're not doing that. And it's a lot easier just to start that stuff from scratch.
I need some new ones, so you can come over to my house. A little ways away, but I'm good for
We'll
that.
talk after.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Abatoye. I think you're on mute.
Okay, do you hear me now?
I can.
Okay, perfect. Good afternoon, and thank you for your presentation. My first question is around the pilots you started. What kind of challenges have you experienced, and what kind of feedback are you hearing from the people who have been part of the pilots?
Yeah, so we've met in person with about 85% of the customers involved in the pilot. In general, the feedback has been, generally people thought they would notice something and they haven't. Kind of going to Councillor Harris's question, it just, I'll say the feedback has been positive. The challenges are really around codes and standards that we've dealt with. So we didn't expect to have the CSA challenge that we had, and we didn't expect it to become something that actually held up the project, because we went live and then we got that notice and actually turned off the pilot for a short period of time while we dealt with that. We interpreted things very different than the CSA, and that it's not just ATCO, but Enbridge has a project similar to this as well in Ontario and interpreted things very differently as well. So that's been the biggest issue as far as like a challenge, is just working through that. I think finally too, I did mention that to go beyond a pilot and to do this more broadly for the region, we need legislative change. And so we're working with the province of Alberta to justify why we need that change and why it's good for Albertans. And I think that's probably our largest challenge today is going beyond pilot to it being part of our core business. And so going back to my very first comments about balancing affordability, balancing sustainability or emission reduction, whatever you want to call it, and then economic growth, making that case to the Premier, the Energy Minister, the Utilities Minister, of why that's good for Albertans, and also how it supports more investment in this region. And I didn't actually answer one of Councillor Harris's question, is who paid for it? And so ATCO paid for it, and not through rates. None of the things you've seen built have been approved through rates. So when you pay your utility bill, it's not on there. And that's because we actually need legislative change to be able to build hydrogen infrastructure and recover it through rates.
You're good, Councillor Abatoye?
Thank you. No, just one more. Thank you for your response. I appreciate that. So I've just been reading about hydrogen-induced cracking and material fatigue. And I'm assuming that, because hydrogen is the smallest element or smallest atom in the element, so there's that risk of, penetration of materials and all of those things. So as long as it's still a hydrogen blend, you don't have that kind of risk until it's like, just back to your points of, if you want to do a hydrogen economy, you have to have all of the infrastructure. So you don't have that risk of hydrogen-induced cracking if it's just a blend, right?
Yeah, so I'm happy to answer that. So there's a few pieces to this that I'll just get into. So when you're talking about hydrogen-induced cracking, that is something that happens with steel pipes, and it happens at high pressure. So the South Fort area is a plastic system. It's not a steel system, and it's not a high pressure system. So there's absolutely no risk of that in that area. However, there is risk of hydrogen induced cracking if you introduce hydrogen to the wrong type of steel pipe, or I shouldn't say wrong, a pipe not designed for hydrogen, and if you do something called pressure cycling. So that means where you're increasing and decreasing pressure quite often. What I can say for gas utility pipes is generally we operate at a pressure. So South Fort would be operated at 80 psi. It's around that pressure plus or minus 1 or 2 psi all the time. And even our high pressure pipelines generally aren't pressure cycled. And so that's why for all the blending projects, we are focused on distribution systems. We are not blending into the upstream. All of that being said, and one of my slides that I went through very quickly is looking at a pipeline called the Pioneer Pipeline and actually converting it from natural gas to pure hydrogen. And that's a high pressure pipeline designed for natural gas. And we are quite confident we can actually convert it to pure hydrogen and provide that energy to a power plant on the back end of that pipeline, decarbonizing the power plant. So it is an issue, but it's an issue for very specific types of steel, and it's an issue for types of steel that are operated in a certain way. So what I can tell you is there's no risk of that in the Fort Saskatchewan area region blending project, but if we picked a pipeline that doesn't have the right materials and was operated a certain way, there's totally a risk of induced crack growth.
Appreciate your response. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Kelly.
Thank you, Greg. I want to offer my response to Councillor Harris and Councillor Abatoye's questions. We live in an area that's now being blended out. Our house was inspected. Super nice gentleman, by the way. Excellent. And we got home last spring, and I woke up one morning to find somebody in my side yard replacing my gas meter. Very nice young lady, genuinely nice. Tolerated me barking at her because I had no idea the meter was going to be replaced. I guess while we were away, we got noticed 3 or 4 times, but never responded. And I thought, they're not home, we're going to get after it. So it worked out seamlessly. I've not noticed a single difference in the functioning of our house. I thought, though, Greg, that we were going to 10%. I don't remember 20. That's fine. I'm just going to put you on the spot. The on-demand boiler that I have hanging in my basement that seems to be fairly sensitive to gas mixtures and exhaust gases, and that's going to work at 20%?
Yes, no problem. We've tested them. I could even share the testing information if you'd like.
I don't need it. Okay. I'll take your word for it. Super. Thank you. So if I might, Mayor Katcher, one question other than my last comment. Can you give more detail on the CSA challenges that you had, please?
Sure. Yeah. So the CSA released a public notice in November of last year, November of 22, and it basically said, and I'll paraphrase a long thing into one sentence, was, we certify appliances for natural gas, not natural gas hydrogen mixtures. And until we sort this out, everyone should stop. And at that point, we were caught off guard would be an understatement, because we had been working with, and the province of Alberta had been working with the CSA for a number of years, involving them in all the stakeholder consultations that have been happening around these types of projects. And so this wasn't like news to the CSA that this was going on. They'd been kept in the loop for many years. And so our first response back to them was, and I'm going to jump from us including them in stakeholder consultations, is, what about Hawaii? So in Hawaii, they have had a blended hydrogen system since about 1970. And the CSA sells their appliances into the Hawaiian market. And to make a long story short, they basically didn't respond to that and said, well, we just certified a natural gas. So our next response was, well, do you know that in Alberta, we see up to 2% hydrogen just naturally in the natural gas? It's generally less than 0.1%, but some systems we can see up to 2% natural hydrogen. So isn't that natural gas? Like, natural gas is not methane. Okay, methane's about 90% of natural gas. The other 10% is butane, pentane, hydrogen, things like that. Okay, we're getting a little bit into the engineering side of this, but they seem to be surprised, I will say, at just those responses. And so we said, look, you've been certifying appliances to have hydrogen in them for decades. You just didn't realize you were doing that. So we have resolved the issue up to 5%, but up to 20, they're, in our opinion, sort of moving slowly, and we will get a resolution to it. It's just, it takes time to go through multiple code committees. Committees have votes. They make a recommendation to the CSA. Then the CSA changes their standards. So that's, I hope, a short version of a very long story, but we'd be happy to meet with you privately and share more information on this and just where we're going. But like I said earlier, it's probably been the biggest single issue for us, because if you're a homeowner and if they say your on-demand boiler is not certified, there's not only a legal issue for us, but Municipal Affairs, who manages the codes in Alberta, will say to us, like, you can't do this, you need to stop. And so that is why we did turn off the pilot for a short period of time until we had clarification on the 5% issue, because we didn't want to put Municipal Affairs in a tough spot, or have CS say you made a warranty claim because your boiler stopped working and they say, well, you're not covered because ATCO did this. And so we've tried to work hand in hand with CSA and with Municipal Affairs to solve this. And I will say we're making progress now.
Okay, good. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay, Councillor Noyan.
Yeah, thanks. Just a simple question on a timeline for phasing in more blending of hydrogen, given that your facility is going to be more functional and fully online in Q1 of 2024. What does that projection look like for going up to 10%, or if that's the next amount? And then maybe are there any challenges that you're foreseeing?
Yeah. I mean, there's obviously construction that needs to finish before I would say the facility is fully complete, but the building itself will be up and running on pure hydrogen no later than like end of Q1 2024. And the only reason we're not going above 5% is CSA. Like, there's no technical reason we can't go higher. We want to have the clarity from them before going higher. And that's because of, like I said, Municipal Affairs is a stakeholder in this. They interpret those codes, and so we just really need that clarity. And we're hoping that'll be hopefully no later than Q2 2024.
That's all right. Okay.
Yeah, that's our internal target, but it's
left
up to
the
them.
unknown.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Blissard.
Hi, thanks for the presentation. I had a couple of other questions that have been answered, but with that pyrolysis, so you mentioned that it leaves blocks of pure carbon.
Mm-hmm.
Are we just moving our problems so that what happens with that carbon? Do we stockpile it? Where does it go?
Yeah, it's a great question. This is where the technology is really interesting. So if we took a traditional low carbon hydrogen plant, and I just want to go back there for everyone in the room who may not understand these things as well as you folks do, we're capturing gaseous carbon, we're compressing it into something called a semi-critical state, so think almost a liquid, and then we're injecting it underground and storing it there permanently. In this case, we are, to your point, creating a solid carbon, so we don't need any of that infrastructure, and that's, depending on the technology, is either known as carbon black, or it can be graphite or graphene. Whether it's carbon black, graphite, or graphene, there are markets for those products. And so just every tire on every one of your vehicles is full of carbon black. And that carbon black today is made through a quite emission-intensive process using natural gas or coal to make it. And so those companies would really disrupt those markets because they would have a very low cost carbon black, and because they're also getting paid for the hydrogen by companies like us. And where it's really exciting for us is when you look at their business models, and some of these companies have like documents as investors you can look at, they can produce hydrogen at the cost of natural gas today. When you include the carbon tax, like just today's carbon tax, not some future higher number, and then also sell the graphene or the carbon black into a market at a price lower than the market price. So this is where, again, we're trying to, in solving the emissions problem, create new businesses and new markets. And obviously with Alberta having the cheapest natural gas in North America, this would be the place you'd want to do that. One final thing, if you're making hydrogen from natural gas using a traditional steam methane reformer or autothermal reformer, you need quite a bit of water. You need no water for the pyrolysis process. So you can put it almost anywhere. You just have a natural gas pipe. But to your point about you're creating a lot of solid carbon, if all we did was create hydrogen this way, we'd probably have too much of it. Is that my cue to stop talking?
No.
Okay.
No.
Okay. So yeah, does that help?
Yes, that helps a lot. Nice to hear that there's a market. It's not just going to a new land area where it's
New
filling
landfill.
up, but
Yeah, no, if we need to landfill it, we've kind of missed the mark with this technology. And that's why I said it's not a silver bullet, as in all hydrogen in the world should be created this way, but it will, it'll definitely disrupt the international carbon markets if it's successful.
I don't know about missing the mark though. I like carbon capture, and I get that there's a reason for it, but I think who knows what happens in 1,000 years, 10,000 years. We may not be here, but maybe it'll be released at some point, some way. So I don't know if that's the essential either. So maybe this is even better.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm next on the questions. So the question that I have, and I know it's been talked about like going from 5 to 10%, and I know you've talked about legislation to be able to do more, but what about, so when we're already in Fort Saskatchewan, so what's prohibiting you from going from South Fort into Pineview, into West Park, into the other side of the highway?
Yeah, so there's an economic and then a technical answer to that. So the way that the gas system works in Fort Saskatchewan, we definitely could make some changes to the pipeline network to expand out the blending without building a new blending facility. But you have 3 unique gate stations that serve gas into this city. We're only blending into one of them. And so without me opening up the hydraulic model to give you a better explanation, it wouldn't be like super easy to blend into everywhere with just small changes. There's also an issue of just being able to produce enough hydrogen at that one site so that, we would keep our blending percentage to somewhere meaningful. If we were to just, I'll say, open up all the valves and let it flow from the one station, like the blending percentage would be really, really low ultimately, which is fine. It's just not for the purposes of our project, we want to have high blending percentages to demonstrate this, just that it has no impact to customers. But the real issue, and I go back to the legislative changes. So today we are paying for this whole project through, not through rates. It's out of our earnings ultimately. And for us to kind of go to the next step, like we need to be able to recover the dollars for this. It's not sustainable to just do it that way for the larger region. So that's why we need a legislative change.
Okay. Then my second question is, and I know you showed on your presentation that Bremner is looking at going at 100%. So how is that going to work for, so if and when that gets going? Where are these appliances going to come from that they would utilize? And I guess how are the people maybe going to afford them? Because I'm assuming they're not going to be cheap.
Yeah. So I have a slide on this, which of course we didn't put in here. But we've actually developed a pure hydrogen combi boiler. And if you don't know what a combi boiler is, it's Councillor Kelly taking your on-demand hot water heater, but it's a furnace and hot water heater all in one box. And so it uses the same technology of an on-demand hot water heater, but also does forced air. And that is a commercial product today that you can buy that runs on natural gas. It's made by a company called Gradient Thermal out of Calgary. And we've worked with them and our partners in Europe to make pure hydrogen versions of them. So those are what is going to be heating the office in Fort Saskatchewan. It's also going into our demonstration show home that is will be up probably by April of next year, and we will just do field certifications for those. So they're going back to CSA stuff, so they're certified. And like I can tell you, we're just taking a product that works on natural gas. We've changed a few parts on the inside so it can run on hydrogen, but like there's an existing appliance for those homes. When it comes to like cooking or fireplaces, we have not made a cooking appliance just yet. We're probably just going to do electric induction cooking in most of those homes. Fireplaces, same thing for now. And it's just because we don't want, not because we can't do them, but we just want to get these project moving like one thing at a time. And that I hope that answers the question. So we have the appliances.
So other than the furnaces,
Yeah.
then it would be, you would have to go with electric.
Yeah. That being said, we have a barbecue. We just have one. It's not certified, and we're looking at garage heaters because people really like those. But honestly, the vast majority of our customers, especially in new communities, actually opt for electric cooking. I know some people really love cooking with gas, and we are pro cooking with gas. We went, what do customers want and where should we invest our dollars? And then fireplaces again, we're kind of going back and forth because customers again seem it, and this is getting, I could talk forever, but the building code is making it extremely difficult for builders to put in multiple, like the ventilation becomes an issue with the new building code and trying to meet the different step codes. And so a lot of them just go to electric for those things. And so will we have hydrogen fireplaces in the future? Yes, but it's not a priority for the first stage of Bremner.
Okay, thank you. I see Councillor Harris has another question.
Yeah, when you responded to Councillor Blizzard about the graphene, graphite, or carbon black and whatnot, I read an article about a month ago that was talking about proliferation of microplastics entering our water courses. Significant problem. And a lot of that apparently is coming from the degradation of tires. So tires on cars that are on the roads that ultimately are degrading, and those microplastics, would that be conceivably part of the carbon black? So that is kind of a technical question, but is that part of the problem that we're seeing with the proliferation of microplastics entering our water stream and our economy or our environment? Any idea on that?
So I'll try. So I don't know much about microplastics, so I don't want to say something that I'll regret. As far, again, I don't know how the tires and microplastics and the watershed all work. What I can say is the carbon black we produce is only carbon. There's no other contaminant in the carbon that if it was to come or degrade off of the tire that would end up in the water stream that's toxic. And just to make a point on this, like the carbon itself is non-toxic from there's no other contaminants in it. It's just pure carbon or pure graphene. That being said, like you don't want to breathe this stuff in. Like it's not good for you. But it's not toxic as in it's poisonous or something like that. It's like it'd be like breathing in ash from a fire. Like that's the closest thing to pure carbon. You just wouldn't want to. It's not good for you.
Yeah, I only asked that question because you brought that up relative to a source of a product that you guys could produce, could conceivably be used in another manufacturing process. And as long as that's well regimented and well thought out, then ultimately, I guess that somebody else has to look after that. So that's why I asked the question. Just curious if there's any link there. And I'm taking that.
And I'd say I don't know is probably the best answer, but I don't believe so. I don't believe so. Yeah.
Thanks a lot.
Great. Well, that appears to be all the questions. I thank you very much for coming out this afternoon. As you can tell, there's a lot of interest, and I'm sure we could talk about this for a long time. I'm just going to say we really appreciate when we come out to AM or RMA or any of these conferences when ATCO is there, and there's nobody more prouder than myself and whoever's walking with me from council. It was Councillor Burgett at our Blizzard at the AM conference, to have Fort Saskatchewan on that board with showing your plant here out in demonstration plant here in Fort Saskatchewan. So definitely gives me a lot of pride, and when you've got it ready, I'm sure council would love to take a tour of it. I know I drive by there all the time looking at it going, oh well, they could expand even more, so but please, if you're willing, when you have time, please feel free to extend an invite. I'm sure we'd love to attend.
And I will say we are going to have like a public kickoff in the spring, like late February, March probably, but we're competing with weather, so we're probably going to wait till later in March. But yeah, and we'll have a big event then. So, and again, thanks to all of you for trusting us ultimately and letting us do the project in your community, because it's where we wanted to do it and it's gone really well. So thank you.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much. And you're welcome to stay, but you're also welcome to leave. We don't hold people back here. All right. Thank you. All right. The next item that we have is Industrial Competitiveness Strategy. Chris Steele and Aaron Brush Duncan. And Chris is online.
And are you able to hear me?
I am. We are. So welcome, Chris.
Wonderful.
And we have 30 minutes set up for your presentation. So you can begin.
Excellent. All right. First of all, Aaron, did you want to start us off, or should I go ahead and jump in?
Mayor and Council, just one moment, if you don't mind. Thank you, Chris. I'll go ahead and get us started, if you don't mind. Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. I'm Aaron Brush Duncan, the Director of Economic Development for the great city of Fort Saskatchewan. With me today is Chris Steele. He is the CEO and President of EBP. Today we're going to be presenting the Industrial Competitiveness Strategy and Toolset. Just to give you a quick background kind of on how we arrived here today. So in December of 2020, Council adopted the bylaw C-2820, which established the Heartland Incentive Program. And then in May 2022, Council approved the Downtown Development Grants Program and the Brownfield Tax Exemption Program. And so those are our three existing kind of incentive programs. And then on April 28th of 2022, administration received the final draft of the Fort Saskatchewan Investment Attraction Strategy. And this report and strategy provided a high-level analysis of our municipality and the surrounding region to identify sectors and industries which the city could target for investment attraction. Within this strategy, 5 target sectors were identified, including long-duration battery storage, specialty metals manufacturing, plastic component manufacturing or carbon fiber, hydrogen, and agricultural processing. And then on October 18th of 2022, Council heard information from an industrial property owner regarding the city's competitiveness within the region. The property owner made a request to consider implementing development incentives for light and medium industrial areas to help improve our industrial competitiveness. And then on November 8th of 2023, Council passed the following motion, which led us here today. That Council direct administration to compile a study that, 1, identifies obstacles and challenges to attracting investment, benchmarks the city's competitiveness for each sector, quantifies any competitive gaps that may exist within these sectors, provides an environmental scan of what other jurisdictions are doing, and recommends options and priorities for financial and non-financial tools to encourage investment. So this following report strategy and tool set was developed to meet this directive. And now we can let Chris Steele begin his presentation. And I do think he is going to be sharing his presentation.
Let us just make sure that I am able to do that. If I may here. Okay, is that working?
Yes, it is.
Wonderful. Okay, well, first of all, thank you and a very good afternoon to you, Madam Mayor, and to Council. Thank you very much for inviting me in here to go ahead and give you an update on where we are on the industrial competitiveness study. This has been a good couple of months here as we've been able to go through and do the benchmarking that has been requested, as well as to talk to interested parties and to put forth several recommendations for council consideration. I'm going to try and be as parsimonious on time as I can, knowing that we just have the half hour here. As Aaron has already described, the purpose of the project, of course, was to better identify and understand the competitive gaps for the 5 target sectors. Those were, in fact, identified in the investment attraction strategy, but also correspond very closely with target sectors that have been cited as priority sectors within the EMR in collaboration with some of the other regional municipalities. The analysis was then intended to be used to develop specific interventions if needed. And from there, I just wanted to, first of all, start with a bit of summary, and then we'll get into some data. First, so I wanted to start off with a very high point here. Fort Saskatchewan is already known amongst the interested parties as being a leader in the energy, agricultural, and metal sectors. There are definitely opportunities for better marketing and site preparedness for potential investors. It was felt in looking through the sectors and taking a look at some of the comparative information that nominal tax credits in the hydrogen and the agricultural industry could help even the playing field for the city of Fort Saskatchewan and complement provincial, national, and other regional initiatives. And I do want to pause here just for a moment and note that when we talk about agricultural activity here, really what we're talking about is food processing and other kinds of value-added processing. So not things that would take place on ag land, but things that would take place in industrial lands. Another key takeaway was the availability of medium industrial lands, or more accurately, the lack of medium industrial lands, is something of an issue for attracting manufacturing sites, particularly for some of the metals and for the battery storage. And lastly, further market research is needed to better understand the plastic components and specialty metal sectors. So let me get into this in a little bit more detail. Just first of all, in looking at specialty metals, it's an existing strength and a potential growth area for the Fort. We know that there's already considerable activity that's happening within the city. Wages and costs are competitive with the peers that we've been looking at, and the value chain is already in place. It's important to think about this through the lens of a site selector or from a company make a location decision. They're only going to go locations that make business sense where the value chain is in place and the labor force is in place. Instead of cost, the challenges here seem to be available sites and also some potential concerns regarding sourcing of ores. Just the value chain as it is now does occasionally use ores from Cuba, which can be a concern in terms of hitting all of the North American market. In terms of plastic components and carbon fiber, it's challenging to get effective information on plastic components and carbon fiber, as while the sector has been a target in the region, and there are to be very strong value chain advantages here, there is yet very little data to pull from to evaluate over-competitiveness on a project-by-project basis to be able to point to specific levers, if it were. What we do know in looking at the projects that have landed in the EMR in Alberta and North America, it appears that capital costs per job created are lower in the EMR. What's not entirely known is whether this is due to lower costs or the value chain advantage I noted, or whether it's due to some other factor that we have so far been unable to completely determine. For the moment, however, I do want to stress that amongst the cost factors that we were able to isolate, there is no specific cost disadvantage for the city of Fort Saskatchewan or the EMR more broadly. Within hydrogen, and I'm very appreciative that you put us in the agenda where we were for today's meeting here. Hydrogen sector is seen as a key and foundational advantage for the EMR and for Alberta going forward, and most importantly for Fort Saskatchewan, given the early role that the city has taken here. However, there are some cost disadvantages regionally due to the already high competition for labor and talent in the energy industry that has been there for decades. The city of Fort Saskatchewan and its neighbors, as Darren had pointed out in the introduction here, had already worked collaboratively several years ago to create the Heartland Incentive Program to address opportunities in the petrochemical industry. However, the program at the time was really targeted at large investments, as is the nature of the petrochemical industry. A similar program targeted at smaller hydrogen opportunities may be an appropriate solution to really kind of jumpstart this here. In terms of agricultural and food processing, once again, in the absence of a current project for the fort, we once again relied both on our experience in other municipalities, as well as an examination of the investment trends and also specific components of the, if you will, the cost model that would be put together. First, once again, a reminder, what we're talking here is really food processing and value added rather than an ag land kind of a solution. It's an industrial investment that we're talking about here. You can see above that the investments per employee is higher in Fort Saskatchewan than in other regional peer municipalities. While this is suggestive of a cost differential, it's not definitive and could be indicative of a different kinds of facility. However, we have been in discussions with Sturgeon and Strathcona counties as part of this project and other conversations, and they've been able to evaluate specific proposed projects in their municipalities and determine, as we did also on a component basis, that there is a cost differential not to, for example, the United States peers, but specifically to facilities that were going into the province of Saskatchewan. And that's due both to lower costs of land, lower costs of labor, as well as some direct intervention at the provincial level in the form of tax credits that have been passed there. It's important to note also that the province of Alberta has already established an agri-processing tax credit, partially in response to the Saskatchewan efforts, but then also as a real recognition that value-added agricultural processing and food processing could be a distinct and important part of the Alberta ecosystem. And for reasons similar to what was done for the Heartland Incentive Program, we also suggest that the city of Fort Saskatchewan maybe consider adopting a policy that aligns with both what Strathcona and Sturgeon County have done, both for the competitive reasons and also really just as importantly to align regionally and allow for better leverage of marketing efforts across the region. I do want to talk about land availability by type. One of the things that has made the city so incredibly successful, of course, is all of the investment that has happened in the city of Fort Saskatchewan in heavy industry, varying different types. And it also does mean that very little heavy industrial land remains available within the city. The lands that are generally available are light industrial and are not necessarily aligned to the needs of some of the target sectors. If you take a look at the breakout of parcels and just kind of how it lies there, there's a considerable amount of heavy industry, again, occupied, and then light industry, but very little medium industry. Heavy industry is pretty well used, and also it wouldn't really make sense to establish additional heavy industry south of 15, both because of really conflict of use issues, but then also because of some of the infrastructure like rail is not directly able to be brought across Highway 15. However, there could be a case for creating additional medium industrial land, which would align with the needs of some of these industrial users a little bit more. I'd like to talk a little bit about the municipal readiness and competitiveness aspects, just as they fit into this. As I had started my presentation with, amongst the interested parties and the other folks that we spoke with across the region and across industry, the City of Fort Saskatchewan already has a very favorable reputation for business friendliness and regulatory readiness, There's been a lot of very good work that has been done to align the needs of the different departments across the city to foster good relationships with utilities as well as with provincial authorities to ensure that processes are known, are transparent, and that sharing of information amongst the parties is actually very, very good. We also do want to note that while development and land costs for industrial sites in the city are broadly compatible or comparable to those in other EMR municipalities, the relative lack of availability of ready-to-develop served land does result in a competitive disadvantage. So just to follow that up a little bit, cost differential between serviced and non-serviced lands is approximately, and this is a little bit of a problem with just in terms of, if you will, data sets that have low numbers of observations. There's an ability to skew the data quite readily. Nonetheless, of the data that we were able to find and take a look at, it looks like there's about $100,000 an acre difference between served and unserved land. And if you think about it, also, it compared to, for example, a Leduc or an Atchison or something of that nature, the scarcity of ready-to-develop land also tends to drive, in a supply and demand method, the price of served land higher. Interviews and research were strongly suggesting to us that the lack of served industrial land is really a competitive gap for the city of Fort Saskatchewan and one that could be addressed. And I've already, of course, covered the light industrial designation. Also, just wanted to point out, just as a little bit of a takeaway on this as well, that utility servicing had been mentioned several times in interviews and really kind of a review of other site selections. If you take a look at projects that went other places in the EMR, the lack of readiness and the lack of utilities at some of the sites was actually seen as, well, I can move here faster, and that speed to execute was actually seen as an issue. I do want to point out that the city does not act alone here with regards to attracting, investing, and expanding investment. Both the Government of Canada and the Province of Alberta have programs that are specifically aligned to the needs of several of these key sectors. And as was done with the HIP, it would be strongly encouraged to think about how to augment and align and to really make the most of some of those programs with any intervention that the municipality might look to do. I have collected for you, and it's within the report in much greater detail, the federal programs as well as the provincial programs that are most appropriate and most aligned with the sectors that we were talking about. And in particular, at the federal level, I would really point out the Superclusters Initiative, the Agriculture Partnership, and the Strategic Innovation Fund. And then within the provincial programs, certainly the city is already working. The HIP is directly built to align with the Alberta Petrochemicals Incentive Program, the APIP. And then, of course, the agro-processing investment tax credit would fit very nicely alongside any action that happens from the agri-foods or the agricultural value added side of things. It's also, I would recommend just kind of keeping in mind some things that Edmonton Global has kind of put forth in terms of their own thoughts and research on the use of incentives and similar programs. And that, first of all, starts from the recognition that any sort of an incentive type intervention is not the only or even a major deciding factor for project location. That's been proven time and again. And that any sort of a program should really kind of build off of the natural strengths of the region, and also should help to build in a very targeted way an ecosystem and an economy that fits and really kind of works with the city. Just from our own experience, we would recommend against any sort of a broad incentive that kind of goes across the board, especially in a region where you're already very economically healthy. There is no pressing economic need or, quite frankly, disadvantage within the community that would really require a blanket call for investment or call to intervene in investment in the region. Instead, any sort of a program that were to apply kind of broad-based across would probably create a little bit more of, quite frankly, a dialogue within the region that would end up being a little bit of a race that you don't really want to be a part of, and would tend to undermine some of the regional efforts that are currently underway. Just to summarize recommendations, we've provided a full grid within the report, and I hope that you've had a chance to take a look through that. And of course, I will remain available to speak with any with council and with administration to talk through any of these. Just to sum a little bit, however, we would recommend that council consider creating a hydrogen incentive program for smaller hydrogen-oriented businesses and investments, for newer expanded businesses with over $10 million of investment and at least 30 employees. This is, of course, significantly smaller than what was in the Heartland Incentive Program, but then also directly aligns with some of the provincial and regional efforts in the hydrogen ecosystem. We also strongly recommend leveraging the Government of Canada and Province of Alberta's tax credit programs for agricultural and food processing. And in particular, both because it aligns well with those efforts and also would create a regional block in terms of attracting this kind of investment, to establish the non-residential tax credit to about 1.5 to 2% of capital investment costs over 10 years. And here again, we recommend that it be new or expanded facilities of about 20 million or more in capital investment, and at least 50 workers during construction or 30 during operations. In terms of other interventions that we would recommend, we do recommend revisiting the zoning classification for parcels to include more, and really that needs to be edited to say medium industrial, not heavy, for the reasons that I cited earlier, particularly to attract some of the battery and the other specialty metals type activities. We also think that while the Fort has been fantastically successful at attracting the heavy industry that it has in petchem and in other forms of processing, the word needs to get out in terms of the value chains that do exist in the Fort and regionally. And the city should coordinate and further leverage Edmonton Global in this role. We also think that there's further information gathering to be done. So really engaging with local interested parties and companies in the specialty metals and plastic component sectors would be useful to better understand their target markets and to understand other levers that might be pulled to better make the city more competitive in this region. Next steps that we would recommend, of course, obviously, is this conversation and any further that might happen to get council's consideration and questions and input, and to incorporate those into recommendations. Anything that ends up being a policy of the city, of course, needs to go through legal review as well. We can provide the detail, the data, and the analysis to go into that legal review. We also would recommend that there's a little bit further work that needs to go into really defining what shovel-ready site preparedness means, and then potentially think about some certifications or checklists that might be able to put in place for any particular piece of land. And then in terms of marketing, as I was just describing, further leverage the works that AIHA, the Heartland Association, Edmonton Global, and the CED initiative are currently doing about getting those interested parties to the table, and then to get some very significant marketing and outreach into the marketplace. And with that, I wanted to go ahead and open this up. I will go ahead and stop sharing here, and I am very happy to take your questions.
All right. Thank you very much for the presentation. I'm sure there's going to be lots of questions. If you don't mind me kicking off, I will start the first one. When you talk about revisiting zoning to include more heavy industrial land, where do you expect that land to just be rezoned to? Because there's people who live and there's conflicts and there's MIAC standards. So how do you think, I guess, your opinion, how do you just say, well, we're going to go from this light use, medium, and we're just going to make it heavy industrial?
Your Worship, it's a very good question, and it's one of the reasons, quite frankly, that we pulled back from the recommendation on heavy more to medium. We do believe that there are lands towards the northern end of what is actually currently in the light area that would tend to reduce some of those conflicts. But we would not recommend heavy to the south of Route 15, both because of that reason and also, as I mentioned before, heavy is very likely to want infrastructure that is just not readily available south of 15 anyway. So medium would start to actually address that issue very, very nicely. And again, none of this can happen in a vacuum. It's about considering and recommending studying.
Okay, and then my second question, we try and limit it to 2 and we go around and around. My second question, when you talk about undermining regional effects, don't you think we all undermine one another anyway? And we're all out there looking for the same investors. So as you said, Strathcona and Sturgeon already have incentive programs. So why should we really care? I guess that's my big question. We're all out there doing it.
Your Worship, it's a fair question. And I understand that, of course, that there's competitive, but if I can provide the outside view, as you and I have had this conversation in the past, and I'm very happy to engage in it. I'm a corporate site selector with over 30 years of experience. And when you're speaking with a company that's coming from away, they are looking, first of all, about being in the EMR. And if the location within the EMR fits and and everything kind of works, then that's that. The more effort that is put at competing amongst and between the locals, the less effort is available to be able to try and expand efforts for bringing in things from outside. So just if a general recommendation, just as a balancing of priorities, of course, there's going to be competition locally, but I would hope that it's competition that brings each to excel.
Okay, I'm going to go on, but I'll be back to you. Councillor Kelly, you're next.
Thank you and good afternoon. A couple simple questions, I think. In your recommendations, you touched on it. It starts out with leverage government Canada, province of Alberta under ag and food processing. So my question is, what possible significance is it for 50 construction workers or 50 workers during construction? How could that possibly be a trigger?
Well, the only reason yes.
I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. Through your worship to Councillor Kelly. The answer is that still the construction costs, the construction workers are still net contributors to the economy. It is a common metric that ends up going into matters of this factor. Again, however, if the city does not feel that that is in fact in line with the overall goals of the community, of the municipality, then that should be omitted. But we do believe that the broader concept of considering thresholds before the awarding of any particular form of incentive intervention are necessary.
And I would agree with that. Thank you. Mayor Katcher touched on or talked about the rezoning for heavy industrial, and we don't have a lot of property or land that might even qualify. Could you speak to the regulatory issues and hurdles that would have to be jumped or crawled through or leapt over to actually accomplish something like that?
Through your worship to Councillor Kelly, I would recommend, once again, we're making a recommendation for something to be studied. I do, from my years of working in the region, am certainly very, very well aware of the fact that this is neither instantaneous nor is it guaranteed. So what I would recommend, again, is that it is an item to be studied.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Blizzard.
Hello.
Just a second here. Okay, go ahead.
Hello. Thanks for your presentation. You mentioned a few times serviced and unserviced land and the difference in cost per acre. How do you suggest we fix that? Would that be something you're thinking Fort Saskatchewan as a city would service land to have more available? And does that bring the price down? I mean, that would be up to the owner of the land, I would think, currently.
That's exactly right. The way that it works, I apologize, through your worship to Councillor Blizzard, just the way that it usually would work would in fact be either the landowner does it, or that if it is an area that is targeted for further development, that the community could in fact work alongside the developer, or a group of developers, if it is an area for further targeted investment. What I would recommend, however, is that any sort of investment that happens in terms of infrastructure be done to meet the specific needs of what the desired end user is. So there is work that is currently being done by the CED to be able to identify those basic infrastructure requirements. So there is a conversation to be gained there.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Oops. Turned myself off. Okay. Okay, I'll go to Councillor Nguyen next. Go ahead.
Yeah, this wasn't a subject that was breached in the report, but I was wondering if you've identified any competitive advantages that Fort Saskatchewan has geographically compared to our competitors. That, if we attract certain markets, that especially in medium industrial, that could service larger industrial and industry to the north of us. Like, how are we positioned in terms of that potential benefit that we have over others?
Through your worship to Councillor Nguyen, there are multiple, as it turns out. First of all, just the general access to workforce of a variety of types is actually quite good. But the transportation infrastructure is fantastic, particularly with regards to highway and road access to the north and to the east. As well as certainly you've got the heavy rail access for bulk that ends up going into the industrial areas north of 15, but there are a rail yard and I believe it's a multimodal facility that is up to the north that could be better leveraged. It's not in the city proper, but it has fantastic access to anybody that is located within the city.
Yep, excellent, thank you. And I think we do have those in our toolbox for marketing this type of land. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I'm next on round 2. So I'm going to come back to this. So you're recommending 5 areas, and you're saying don't do you recommend against a blanket call. So if we're doing so well right now, why are we not getting the investment? I mean, if you're saying the incentives are going to bring these ones, but it's not going to benefit the other ones, then how come we're sitting here with all of this light industrial and medium industrial land that's not being developed? And it can't be just servicing, because we have opportunities for wet ponds and things like that. So answer that for me.
Your worship, thank you very much for the very direct question. It's complicated. I would suggest that there are multiple matters, but that an incentive is not going to be your answer. The incentives that we have recommended here allow for leveraging of tools that are available, again, from people with much larger pots of money. So first of all, they would be able to leverage that in a way that, first of all, doesn't expose the municipality nearly as much as a larger one would. The other is that through a simple program of that nature, it allows for some site selectors and for some companies to pay attention when they wouldn't otherwise. But it does not kind of get past the fact that there's additional work that needs to be done to be able to get the word out that the lands are there, but also to ensure that they are in fact what these users are looking for. So the broader conversations with the interested parties and with the industry, and to be able to say, we actually have things that fit within your value chain and actually meet your needs for people, meet your needs for infrastructure, meet your needs for being around your suppliers, meet your needs for being around your markets.
Okay, so we're in committee of the whole, so I can make a comment. So being the mayor for 13 years, I've worked with the developers who are out on these lands and own a majority of them. Mm-hmm. And they've done everything that you've said they've done, but still people go to Atchison, they go to Nisku, and now we're going to be running competition with the new ASP over by the Vilna Airport for food processing and everything else that they're planning on. And you said they've already got an incentive. So I guess my concern with your report really is, if we don't open it up to more, are we not just setting ourselves up just to continue to have stagnant lands for years and years to come? And while I appreciate you say, well, we've got the heavy industry, I guess just my question is, and we've gone out with the developers and said, why aren't you building here in the fort? All of your customers are like right across the road from you. They're within a couple of miles. And yet they go, yeah, no. So I'm struggling with that recommendation, really struggling with it.
Your worship, I completely understand. I would say, having spent some time over in Atchison and Nisku and Leduc, some of those lands are a little bit more ready to play. They're plug and play, particularly in Atchison. The way that Atchison works is, in fact, they move, quadrant by quadrant by quadrant, and actually pre-permit and pre-serve the land and then bring it to market. It is something certainly that the city could do.
Okay, so nobody's on the speaking list. I'll jump out when somebody comes on. But so I guess the question, when you say plug and play, so we have service lands in a first component. So nobody's going to go out and service the next component before they actually start making money on the first one. These are business people, so we're sitting there saying people, they're not coming just because they're service land. And the first question that I'm always asked by anybody who is looking at it is, well, is there an incentive? And I guess the next portion of it is everybody is required through the EMRB. We can't just jump, and it has to be contiguous growth anyway. So, I find and I'm going to be gentle when I say this, I find your report is very prescriptive. It's very limited. And I'm not sure the recommendations will actually bring what we're looking for within our community. I'm just really struggling with it. So when we get to the end of this, I'm going to be asking, okay, here's the report. But does council have the opportunity then to say, yeah, we're not accepting this, or we want to make changes to it? And I'll ask that to Erin.
Thank you, Mayor. I do have a slide that talks a little bit about some of our proposed next steps that actually involve taking some of the feedback from council regarding this report. Am I able to share?
Okay, so just before, Chris, stay on the line in case there's any questions, but I do thank you for your presentation. I do thank you for the report. So we'll hear where Erin goes next, but just stay on, okay?
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you everybody for participating and sharing your thoughts today. One of the things that I'm kind of here to do is talk a little bit about our next steps. So coming up next will be us creating an implementation plan that will take some of the recommendations from this report, as well as feedback from council, as well as I'm going to be taking this report and meeting with Edmonton Global and AIHA to hear some of their thoughts. And I'm also going to be meeting with some of the landowners that are in this area, as I'm sure you all have received the letter that was from one of the landowners in this area. And we'll be meeting with them directly to kind of talk through their thoughts on this report. And so we will be taking all of these different pieces and creating an implementation plan on what are the steps that we're going to take moving this these recommendations forward and creating this industrial kind of strategy back to council, and we're hoping to be back before the end of 2023. And like I said, so we'll be taking the strategy, feedback from council, things that you'd like to see, or I've been writing down all your questions to make sure we can address those in our next presentation, as well as that engagement with the landowners, AIHA, Edmonton Global, and some of our other interested parties when we create that recommendation, or when we come back with that implementation plan. Okay. And we will also most likely be working to propose both financial and non-financial interventions, more of a holistic strategy.
Okay. So I'll open that up to questions. Any questions for Ms. Brush-Duncan? Go ahead, Councillor Kelly.
You're going to have to bear with me. I'm not so certain it's a question, but an observation, and maybe you could respond. It would seem to me, Aaron, that there's part of the issue we have in Fort Saskatchewan is that Niskayu's been developed as light industrial, medium industrial for pretty much my entire adult life, so 50 years. Atchison probably just about that long as well, and Fort Saskatchewan's kind of last of the trough, so to speak. So how do we get the tipping point, and what do we need to do to get the tipping point, because it will feed on itself eventually. I think that's what's happened at Nisku and what's happened at Atchison. What does it take to get to the tipping point in Fort Saskatchewan? Have you given that any thought?
Through your worship to Councillor Kelly, it is something that we have been thinking through kind of in this longer term process, especially for this industrial competitiveness strategy. And so a few of my thoughts are we are in economic development working on doing a better job of marketing all of the benefits that we have here. It's something that is a real priority for us moving forward. We are hoping to see some larger investments, getting that next phase of announcement in the area. And I think that will also pose us or kind of help to get us a little bit more on that map. And I think that we're going to see some spin-off investments there, and that's something that we're hoping to see really soon. And then I think when we are starting to look at some of these proposed incentives, for instance, on the smaller scale hydrogen, these are for those much smaller scale projects than necessarily would fall under that Heartland Incentive Program. And so I think that it does actually start to bring some of those investments in as well. And like I said, we do receive requests for information from different businesses that are looking to locate in this general region. We get a lot of those from Invest Alberta. We get those from the Edmonton Global, from AHA. And so what we do is we take kind of what those different businesses are looking for. You know, what are those pieces? Why would they choose a location, their site selection requirements? And we work with landowners in the area to see what we have available. And so those are kind of how we're beginning to inform what our next steps would be moving forward.
Okay, thank you. I look forward to the next phase of the report. Thanks, Aaron.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Harris.
This is probably a question for Chris, and I thought about it earlier, but I wanted to see what the recommendations were from our economic development staff. So we're anticipating a fairly imminent announcement from Dow on a business case they put forward to their board of directors that would see very significant uplift in relation to industrial expansion on their properties in Fort Saskatchewan. Would you anticipate that that could create an uplift in the service context that we're talking about that typically would become home to medium industrial, light industrial types of lands? Do you see any uplift there from a kind of a site selection experience point of view that you've had over 30 years? And if so, how do we market
Through
that?
your worship, that's a very good question. Through your worship to Councillor Harris, most definitely, absolutely. Any sort of an event that brings a spotlight upon the municipality is an opportunity to be able to directly outreach to the suppliers and the vendors that are working with anybody at that kind of a scale. It would really be incumbent upon both the city as well as its regional marketing partners to reach out to exactly those suppliers, along with Dow's assistance. It would be a fantastic opportunity to leverage those lands.
Thanks a lot. That's kind of what I've been thinking too. When I read through this report, when the agenda came out, I was kind of thinking about that because, you know, I've obviously struggled with, being in the city since the mid 90s and having had responsibility for economic development for the city when I worked for the city. And we always wondered what we could do to create better uplift for the light industrial park in particular that's been here since, I think, when Councillor Kelly was actually quite young. And I say that with the greatest smile on my face. But anyways, yeah, that's always been something. But again, those are smaller parcels and probably tend to be a little bit harder to service other than for smaller, kind of small to extremely medium-sized ventures. So anyways, we'll put that in the back pocket, and hopefully our economic development group is working in that context, as they have been obviously well connected with Dow and trying to do what we can to support their business case going forward. So thanks a lot for your report, and thanks for your response.
Thank you.
Councillor Nguyen.
Yeah, a question for you, Aaron. You alluded to this when you were commenting just about the expressions of interest that we've received. I'm just wondering, in the last year, how much interest have we seen in some of this light medium industrial land, and kind of how has that panned out? Or like, you don't have to give maybe exact numbers or anything, but would you say that there is an uptake in interest from what council and developers have been working on thus far?
Through your worship to Councillor Nguyen, I would say that our Economic Development Department receives probably, I'd say on average, about 2 kind of requests for information a month from different sources. Sometimes those are projects that make a lot of sense for our community, and we respond with, here's some potentially available lands, here's some information that would show that we would be a great fit for that potential investment. Sometimes a request will come in that we don't have either any lands that quite meet that request, or we don't have the infrastructure or some of the other pieces that they're specifically looking for. And so it's very kind of dependent on what's being sent our way. I would say that I think Fort Saskatchewan is becoming more well known, not just in the Edmonton metro region, but definitely outside of there. So I would say that I think interest is definitely increasing.
Great to know. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I'm just last one here. So I look forward to the next steps. I hope you really take into consideration what you're hearing. I really have concerns though when I hear, incentives aren't going to be anything that is going to tip the scale. When we talk about tipping the scale, we don't have an Edmonton International Airport like right next door to us, so that's a disadvantage to us. We know we are competing with, our counties as well, and they have a vast amount of land that they can utilize, as we've seen through some of the reports and that come through EMRB. So for me, I'm just really, really concerned about limiting this to the 5, especially when you talk about battery storage and maybe if we can get production of lithium batteries, that would be awesome. But I'm just really looking forward to the next report, and hopefully it should come to a committee of the whole so that we can have more frank conversations about it. Okay?
Absolutely. Thank you, everyone, for your comments, and we'll take them back and hope to be back before council before the end of the year.
Which isn't that far away.
No, Christmas is around the corner.
Okay, thank you very much. Does council need a little break? Okay. It's 3:28. Do you want 10 minutes? Okay. Yeah, 3:40. We'll recess till then. Okay, we will return from the recess and go into item 5, asset management update. Stuart, Stuart Gerber and Clayton North, are you presenting?
Good afternoon, Your Worship, members of council. I'm excited to be here today because we've made a lot of progress this year in terms of asset management. Since the last time I spoke a year ago, we finalized the agreement with PST Citywide, our software vendor of choice. As I mentioned before, that we did do a comprehensive review and RFP process to the selection of them. And I try to include as many business groups within the city as possible. And this vendor was selected through the conglomeration of 16 different people representing different business units in the city. Since that time, a lot of the work this past year has been put forward to the processing of data, collection of data to put it into the system. Right now, within the asset repository, we're approaching 100,000 records. 65,000 of those are spatially referenced, so your pipe infrastructure, sidewalks, roads, all this information we could get from the GIS. A few layers have been created this time as well to represent information that's in the TCA registry that's better represented spatially than textually within the system. A lot of our struggle has been in terms of matching the TCA information to the spatial records. Some of them have been great where there's been asset IDs that have occurred in both the TCA record in finance and in the GIS, where other ones were going down to date of creation, the length of the actual asset, and we're still struggling with some of those assets. I would say probably 3/4 of my time in the past year has been focused on the data and getting it to the condition that it's in. And as of about April, we were getting enough data in the system where we could actually start working with how the system is going to operate within the city and see how the processes were going to work and start developing the processes that we're bringing forward to the departments. I've been engaging departments like risk management, OH&S throughout the process because I've been wanting to bring forward more value-added components as we go forward. So with our pilot project with the utilities group, I've started building a plan layer where I can actually link all the as-built drawings for newer subdivisions to the actual GIS layer, so it's available to them if they're on a tablet. They can download the as-built in the field. Going through OH&S, for utilities, I've built their training matrix of requirements through OH&S. In doing this, I'm tracking their training certifications within the application, but linking it to the employee and to the asset. So if they're certified on skid steers, backhoes, any of that type of equipment, if their training certification expires, the person putting in the next work order will actually be notified on screen. And it also gives the supervisors an opportunity to go into the system and review 30, 60, 90 days in advance of what training certifications are coming due. So it gives them an opportunity to actually potentially manage their own training within their own groups within the system. And as I mentioned, we've started the pilot with the utilities group. One of the main reasons was because they were more technologically advanced than other areas. So I'm getting more feedback as we're going through and putting more things in front of them. At this point, we're doing all the vehicle inspections that they're using every day within the system. We're starting to produce work orders for them. The regularly scheduled ones are just going in, but for the past couple of weeks, we've been taking the work orders from Service Tracker and call-ins and putting them into the system, so that they're actually starting to do a small number of work orders at this time, but at least getting familiar with the system with the vehicle inspections. Just a quick overview of PSD Citywide. There's two major components. There's the Asset Manager, which is the central repository of all the assets. This is a big thing for finance because they can keep track of all the TCA and all of their assets within the city, look at depreciation of the assets, life cycles of the replacement timelines of the assets. This will feed into the long-term planning for the city as we move forward. The other side is Maintenance Manager, where this is the work order service. And we'll be putting this into utilities, parks, fleet, roads, and facilities to start it out with. Along with the desktop application, there's also a field app, so they can work on their cellular telephones, the tablets they're using, and they can bring in the information they need and have access to the information they need. The interesting thing with PSD Citywide is these two parts, Asset Manager and Maintenance Manager, are two separate projects for them. So there's two separate projects going on at one time to develop the one operational system. The roadmap ahead, we're currently working with utilities. We're going to start setting up the system for parks, and then fleet, roads, and facilities, as I mentioned. We also have some system integrations to work into this for parts and materials. There's a possibility of actually doing the payroll system through this as well, and we're working through the complexities of actually doing the payroll component as we speak. But besides the top 5 that I've listed, there's other areas that we still need to address. Bringing planning in for their long-term planning. Working through the machinery and equipment list in TCA, which hits almost every department. Fire department, protective services, information technology. Then I have to work with culture and recreation because I've been notified that they may have 30,000 cultural artifacts that may go into the system. So it's been an interesting project in that the data is really driving this step forward. The challenges that we're having, we've got probably 70-75% of the TCA data matched up. But the other data is going to take a lot more work because we've done all the easy stuff at this point. The other ones are going to require going through the as-built drawings and trying to figure out where the reference was for the length of this asset, that's a discrepancy within the system. And because of this, I need to maintain the momentum for the project. To do this, I'm looking at adding into the proposed budget for 2024 a term position for 2 years to assist me. Because as I'm doing data and setting up the system, I'm also doing training for staff. And as I add in more groups, I'm going to be doing more support for more staff. So my time for looking at the data, doing some of the basic setup may be diminishing because of that. And that's the main driving force to help me get this, maintain the momentum of the project and to move it forward through all the other branches. Hopefully that was nice, short, sweet, and we can take questions now.
Okay, thank you very much. So, Councillor Harris, you're first.
This is obviously a very complicated process, but simple in the same light. How would you rate the quality of our data sets in terms of our mapping, our GIS, the topological data that you're working with? Is everything clean from that standpoint in relation to being able to identify, and I'm talking about the hard assets, so the pipes in the ground, all of the things that are connected to the utility system, for example, valves and shut off and this and that. Is all that stuff been well mapped and is resident in our mapping system so that when you're dealing with a pilot project with our utilities people, that they know that that is a 10-inch valve, or there is a pipe and it's here's the elevation of the pipe, here's the invert of all the rim and invert stuff for all the manholes. You got all that stuff all cleaned up, because it existed at one time, but then as long as we've been working on, the city's been working on asset management, like I said, since 1998, 99, not a lot happened. So have you had to clean all that up, or where are you at with all that, which serves as the basis for what we work with?
Most of the utility assets were pretty accurate.
Okay.
A lot of them I'm probably 75 to 85% matched. My struggles come in where some departments are using third-party applications, so they've taken the core GIS data, put it into that application, but it's not integrated to go back to the GIS, so making our GIS out of date. Or another one where the unique ID for the asset within the GIS was updated, but it wasn't conveyed to finance to update the TCA register.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden I've got two totally different asset IDs. I have no way of matching them, or even the sequence of the asset ID is different.
So you have protocol for cleaning this up, obviously, within an asset management standpoint. You know you're going to have outliers, and you're going to have...
Yeah.
Okay.
I knew I've got an extensive background in GIS, and data's been most of my experience. So I'm used to going in and cleaning up the data and finding the sources. But it's some of the older data is still a struggle at this point.
Okay. So second question, if you're proposing an asset management technician, is that something that ultimately is better done by somebody at that level in relation to cleaning data and making sure the veracity of the information? Is that a better use of their time as opposed to yours?
Well, it's to have someone who's a little more focused on it.
Okay.
Where I'm going in between different tasks, trying to achieve different things and trying to move this forward and trying to maintain the momentum of the project.
Well, thanks for your report. This is good, because I think that it's a very complicated subject, and I know it's of interest to a number of councillors sitting at, well, probably all of us are very interested to make sure that we got that in line. So thanks for your work.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Kelly, you're next.
Yes, thank you. Good to see you back here.
Thank you.
Great work. Appreciate it. Huge chore. Once this thing is matured, though, and I don't know when that happens, but how is it updated? Will it be up to each individual department with a protocol to continuously feed, or are we going to need a designated person to feed the system going forward?
A lot of it, if it is the spatial GIS data, we can do updates to that. So we can actually import the new data updates and put that information into it. Like you said, when we get it to that final stage, like my vision is to have every user manual included into it. So fleet, with every piece of equipment they're getting, they can go to that individual asset and go into the attachments and, okay, here's the user manual, here's the maintenance manual, because we'll already be tracking the maintenance history, but they need that reference material easier to access than going to the W drive on our network and sifting through the folders, where if you know what the asset is you're working on, you have that direct access to the asset.
And 10 years from now, when we buy a new, well, in our budget, a new road grader with a side sweep and whatever the thing was, who will input that into the system along with its manual and along with whatever's necessary, the serial numbers off of the whatever. You get my point. Who's going to put that in? Will that be the department?
That I'm hoping more the department instead of us trying to manage their information, because they have a better idea of what they have, what's in service, what's not in service. And even as part of this pilot project, I've been doing training for the clerks, I've been training for the operations staff, and even their supervisors. And I've been camped out at Public Works to support the clerks, the operations staff, and I'm going to their 7:30 meeting in the morning, just to make sure that there's no issues. There's a couple that have been on vacation, so I'm supporting them a little bit more as we go forward.
Sorry, if I can jump in here or add to Stuart's comments. There will be, I think, one of the things that we have seen with the data cleaning that we've had to do. In order to maintain that, there will need to be an audit process that we'll have to start looking at down the road as well, to ensure that it is consistently updated. I think it makes sense to have the information with the departments that's consistent with our model elsewhere, but we do need to have an audit process in order to ensure that it's being that both the financial and the non-financial data is updated regularly.
Thank you. Appreciate it, gentlemen. Good to see you.
Okay. I'm next on the speaking order. So I'm with Councillor Harris. We've been working on asset management for a lot of years. I've been over there since 1990. So I guess the question that I have is, because when you talk about vehicle inspection, service tracker, and life cycle, so those used to get inputted on their time cards when they were working on something, or, so the mechanic would say, well, I'm working on unit such and such, and I did this, this, and this. And it would actually track the parts, it would track how much time they spent on it, it would track the hours of it. So did that all get lost? Or what happened?
Yeah, you're correct. As part of the work order process, we're able to track the time associated to the work. We're actually able to link it specifically to the individual vehicle or asset that they're working on, the parts and materials that they're working on. So we can track whether it's an individual doing it, a group of people, or even a person that comes in for 15 minutes, half hour to assist. We can have all that information tracked, the costs associated to it. But in doing the maintenance reports and everything like that, if there's an issue, that's easily accessible through the system by risk management now, because they can go review all the maintenance history in the same system. They can go see all the inspection reports within it without having to go to the department. It's right there on their desktop.
On their desktop.
Well, through the application.
Okay. And I'm only asking that because I know when I worked over there, everything got input in when we came to budget. Said, okay, this one had this many hours, and we challenged, whether something would be required to be turned over or not. And they were able to tell us all of this information. It was all, I think it was their PMS system back then. I'm not sure. It's while ago, but and that's why I'm asking that. And they also did it for the facilities as well when they were working in the facilities, because they had actually got to a point that they could say, well, they got a work order for City Hall to come and change the lights, and for a period of time, they actually charged City Hall for their time and for their equipment. So I guess, what assurances do we have as we're going forward that this just isn't another blip in time with another data set that's going to be replaced in X number of years that's going to require all of this again?
Maybe I can jump in on that. I think part of it, what a lot of the work that Stuart's actually done on the ground has actually been about building a culture and making sure that people that on the ground were like our frontline operations are using it successfully. That there's a strong buy-in, but there's also a number of integrations that will be built into this, so that the information that you're talking about that was in WorkTech that someone would go and look at a report to look, say, whether we need to replace a vehicle, will actually now feed directly into, or will eventually feed directly into our budgeting systems, so that you can see whether a system is aging, whether a piece of equipment is aging, a vehicle is aging faster than or slower than expected, and it updates our financial records, our budget systems, and even when we're doing replacement schedules on our 10-year capital plan, when we're estimating optimal balances, things down that line. So there is that roll up. So embedding all of those integrations will help to embed the usage of it, of the system and the data for the long term. But it also, a lot of the work at the end of the day is focused around building culture and building buy-in. Eventually, we will go to another system. These systems continue to evolve and develop and get better, and we will have to plan for moving to new systems, and hopefully, like we're doing with WorkTech, we're able to bring a lot of that information over, so it's not lost. It's kept. It's brought into the new system.
Okay, I'll just leave the rest of my comments. It just seems like we've been doing this forever, and it's just always a new system, and that I'll just leave it with that. Councillor Harris?
My observation would be this is about change management, and it's about an appropriate change being managed and led from the top. And what you're talking about, Madam Mayor, is that over time there has been a change of leadership that has lost sight. And I'm not being critical of any of those leaders, but losing sight of the leadership for this project that should have evolved over time. Like I say, we started this in 1999, and it should have been done probably within 5 years if it had been done. But there was nobody that ultimately was leading the thing that really was as experienced as you two gentlemen are, one from a financial, one from an asset management standpoint. And so I think that is the biggest thing. Plus, we have a council that is supporting the need for this system to make decisions. So one of the things that I observe is that we hear repeatedly, oh, that vehicle has reached the end of its asset life. I don't want to hear that anymore. I want to see, okay, it has, so prove it. Give me, in other words, we've expended 85% of its useful lifespan, and here's an example. Here are the maintenance records, here's this sort of stuff, and talk about it in specific enough terms that members of council can draw reference to that. So change is about having appropriate leadership, leading the project, and making sure that you guys get done what you need to get done. So that leads to my next question. So what would you suggest, since we got back onto this thing probably about 5 years ago, 6 years ago? The whole asset management. Well, they've been working on it for a long time, but really got back onto it. How much would you suggest from a financial perspective, if we look at a cost-benefit analysis, how much have we expended to get to where we are today? And how much would you suggest, and this could be a report at a later time, how much would you suggest we still have to expend to get to the nirvana of asset management where we can really use it to make appropriate decisions on tangible capital assets?
I'm not going to hazard a guess as to how much we've spent. I think we're probably all of Stuart's time. Obviously, there's been a portion of my time. There's been also a portion of a number of asset management best practices that have been embedded into the budget cycle. Again, we're tying closer. Optimal balances are tied largely in a lot of them to underlying TCA assets now, as well as a whole bunch of other areas. There is a significant amount of work to go, but I think there's stuff that we would do anyway, whether it's part of a software system or just a part of evolving our culture and our practices when we're building out. I would guess maybe 10% of my time over the last, I think I got involved in about 2018, late 2017, 2018 on this. As part of, I think it was out of the Hempson study that was the first part of it. I know that others have been involved in there in varying capacities, both from engineering, from public works, fleet facilities, leadership team. John has been a huge supporter of this, as an example.
So what you're talking about is it's become a cultural imperative in our organization now, where it wasn't when we first began. Nobody knew what it was, and they didn't really care. I didn't really care about it, quite frankly, and I was in charge of it back in the day. But now we have a new cultural approach to it. Would you say that's a fair assessment? You're training people to really embrace this properly?
Actually, I haven't had a lot of issues on that. Because the leadership in the departments are very excited about getting this moving forward and the capability of it.
Good.
It's just managing, like you said, it's a very big change management process and managing the expectations as well.
Okay. Well, thank you very much.
Yeah, I've been very lucky in terms of who I've been able to work with and the support I've gotten.
Good deal.
Okay, Councillor Kelly.
Just following up on the last line of questioning, and I know Councillor Harris isn't being critical of the cost. He's looking for an idea. I get that. I wholeheartedly support this. I know there's a cost. And I know you won't do this, Clayton, but I'm going to ask you. Give me your wild ballpark guess at market value of city assets. $1 billion, $2 billion?
I know that the historic cost of our existing city assets is in excess of $700 million at their historic cost. Adding inflation, you're well over $1 billion, possibly maybe 1.5, 2 at the very high end, I think.
And that's my point. It's an enormous asset base with a very large valuation. It requires some effort and some investment to maintain it, and that's well done. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. That appears to be all of the questions, so thank you very much. Go forth and prosper with asset management.
Thank you, Your Worship, and members of council.
All right, we will move on to the next one, Council Remuneration and Expense Review Update. Andrew Kaiser presenting. God bless you.
Good afternoon, Chair and members of the Committee of the Whole. My name is Andrew Kaiser, and I'm the City's Director of Legislative Services. I am here to discuss Council remuneration and expenses as requested by Council. During the regular Council meeting of June 27th, Council passed the following resolution, which states, in part, that Council direct administration to review the expense amounts within the Council remuneration and expense policy and procedure, in addition to the budgeted amounts for overall travel and meals, against comparable municipalities specified by the policy and procedure. First, I would like to say that in addition to the municipalities specified by the policy and procedure, you'll notice that St. Albert, Stony Plain, and Strathcona County have been included in this comparison. This was done for a more holistic view of municipalities in the region, but also because, as you may have noticed from the report, each municipality has a different approach in the way they manage council budgets and expenses. Because of this, a true apples-to-apples comparison wasn't totally possible. When setting out on this project, I hoped to have very clear comparisons based on the general ledger codes that council is familiar with, but this was difficult for certain municipalities and certain categories of expenses. Because of this, an overall summary of each municipality's council budgets is contained in the report. As council discussed on June 27th, one of the primary areas which the comparison was to focus on was the budgeted amounts for travel and related expenses. So I will discuss these as best I can within this presentation. From those municipalities we could gather close to like-for-like data from, as it states on page 5 of the report. Our councillor budgets are in alignment with those municipalities, being Camrose, Airdrie, Cochrane, Okotoks, and Strathcona. By consolidating courses, conferences, meals and accommodations, and transportation GL codes, it has us sitting a few $100s higher than those comparable municipalities, but again, we have to understand that there are different ways these municipalities manage their funds and code their expenses. So those that are clear matches, we appear to sit a little bit higher, but that maybe isn't a totally honest statement because there's a little bit of a difference between the categorization. So as for the travel and vehicle allowances, it's another difficult comparison because the way they calculate allowances varies greatly between municipalities, and it depends on the character of municipalities. You'll note that Strathcona indicates that if you're in a rural ward, you get a different vehicle allowance. So even that in itself presents a bit of a complication in terms of comparison. But nearly all municipalities state that the actual expensing of mileage incurred, which is just a part of the travel, which we're talking about, is done in accordance with their policies, which are closely aligned with ours, and many of them quote the provincial mileage rate as we do. So, without rehashing all the amounts in the report, I'll simply state that depending on the wishes of council, after having reviewed this information, council could elect to refer this matter back to administration to return with another committee of the whole for additional discussion and some proposed changes, or refer the item to the 2024 operating budget deliberations, during which council may elect to increase program funding for elected officials, and then with that additional funding, we would allocate it accordingly to the respective GL codes. So I welcome any questions. The time is yours.
Okay, thank you. I'll open it up to questions. I'll start the first question. So I guess the question that I have, and I know you use Camrose on this one, but they're not within a growth board. They don't have anything that really resembles what happens within the other mid-sized cities. So as you're looking at that, would it not be more beneficial to use better comparables when we look at what we're doing within our own municipality?
Yes, that might be the case. Camrose is one of those that is specified by our policy and procedure as a comparable, just strictly due to, I suppose, approximate size. It was in the council adopted policy, so it was included in this comparison for that reason. There's a multitude of factors that affect the comparison, but yeah, that's noted.
Okay, it's open for questions, comments. You have to push your buttons. Like, go ahead, Councillor Blizzard.
Yeah, I brought this forward mainly, not that I felt we needed a huge jump, but I just feel when I was looking, and I haven't gone to 2 yet this year, but for future, it's very, very tough to go to a couple of conferences. And I feel they're a vital part of our job, connecting with some of the different organizations from cities to busing to, just anything that we do to get different ideas. I know some don't value them as much, but I find they are very valuable. So I'd like to have it so that we can discuss it more, maybe in the option 3, and look at what are those numbers. I mean, we don't need a huge jump, but we should be able to go to these conferences without worrying about, oh my gosh, the hotel is a fortune. The conferences are always in a big city where the hotels are expensive. It's unrealistic to be out in a Ramada Inn or whatever that's, an hour's drive away because that's cheaper to get back and forth, because a lot of it happens early in the morning and continues all day long. I encourage input from all the other council, but I just feel that we need a realistic budget. Maybe part of it would be increase it a bit, but also open the envelope so that we have one full amount. Instead of, promotions, you could use promotions, but we have a printing one that I don't think I've ever accessed, or if it was by admin because I submitted something that fell under that. But I don't think, we don't print anymore. It's all emailed and yeah. So there's parts of the budget that I think we should just revisit and look at maybe the bigger picture.
Okay, Councillor Harris, just a second. Go ahead.
I think this was a timely review. I don't think we need significant, if any, increase to the budget. It's a question of how we allocate the resources to achieve whatever we want to do. I agree, we don't need a printing budget. And quite frankly, I don't need a promotions budget either. But if we took those funds and used them in ways that we could achieve positive outcomes in terms of our jobs as elected officials. And it's always a sensitive topic when you talk about remuneration and expense reimbursement for elected officials. But, we've got a job to do, and we're doing the job. And attending conferences, some of us, see more value in that than others, or have more ability to do that and to attend those things. And so, that's just part of the job. So I support next steps number 3. I think we need to look at it and determine if we can make some tweaks to this thing without even increasing. I think we got enough money on the table that we can allocate it in a different way to achieve better outcomes. So that would be my 2 cents worth.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Kelly.
And I don't disagree with both comments that were just made about tweaking. But I thought maybe I heard Councillor Blizzard suggest that the budget be increased to allow for attendance at multiple, maybe 2 conferences per year. And that I don't support unless they're relatively inexpensive and you fit them inside your budget. And I think we live within our budget, and I'll leave it at that. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I'm going to give my seat up to, sorry I can't do it to the Deputy Mayor because it's too hard for her to see if there's discussion and debate. I'd actually like to put the motion number 2 on, that we refer this back to administration to return to a committee of the whole. And I'm going to say before Q4 of 2023 to discuss potential changes in the remuneration and expense policy GOV 009, specifically where I would like to see it using comparable municipalities that are within growth boards. So I would change the time frame and add comparable municipalities within growth boards. Mr. Just a second. Mr. Fleming, did you?
Yeah, Your Worship, I think just maybe it's a minor thing, but I just would refer it to return to a council meeting and not a committee of the whole. I believe this is our last committee of the whole of the year. So we would just bring it to one of the last 2 regular meetings we have left.
Well, I can leave it as Q1 2024 because
I think it's fine if you want us to bring it back. We might not have as much depth to bring back with the shorter turnaround, but we can put it on the November. There's a council meeting in November and there's the one in December. We can bring it to one of those two for discussion. It just don't refer to a committee of the whole because we just don't have any of those left.
Okay, so take committee of the whole out, then make it Q4 2023 and comparable municipalities within growth boards. And just speaking in favor of that, I think Camrose has been on this forever, and I think it was before growth boards were even put into place, but the dynamics are so much different. Fort Saskatchewan is within a growth board. We have Heartland Foundation, we have Alberta's Industrial Heartland, we have so many other boards and committees and dynamics that are far more in depth than what Camrose does. I'm not speaking negatively against Camrose, but their council is very much part-time, even including the mayor. And I think, you know, we changed when we did the city manager's review to exclude that and actually deal with municipalities that are within you know, with the same kind of dynamics. And I'm not asking for the any financial changes. I'm asking for it to come back, have some discussion about it, and go from there. That's all I'm asking for. So on. Oh, yeah, that was the motion. So they'll bring it up. Do you want me to? I turned it over to you. Do you want? Huh? Yeah, I read the motion in, but I changed. Mr. Fleming?
Just, it's a referral.
Yeah, it's
and
a referral.
Referral's the only kind of motion you can make during a committee of the whole. Yeah.
Yeah. And I did turn the chair over, so you're on discussion and debate, so go ahead. It gets complicated.
I'll accept that referral motion. And I see that Councillor Kelly is first on the speaking list.
Help me understand, Mayor Katcher. We have already in the data given Fort Saskatchewan, Spruce Grove, Leduc, St. Albert, Stony Plain, and Strathcona County. So that's half of the growth board. I'm not sure what additional information you think you need that isn't already here.
If I can speak?
Yes, you may.
Okay, thank you. So it's just revising the policy itself. The policy has specific ones, including the city of Camrose. So I'm asking them to go back, take Camrose out, and put in somebody who is an actual comparison.
Understand. I support that. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Seeing no more, anyone else have any questions? Seeing no more questions.
Can I just get a couple questions to the mover before? So I just want to make sure, just so we get it right, we'll be back before the end of the year. This talks about potential changes to the actual policy itself.
Right.
So my understanding or my intent when I wrote this one in here, because I was trying to create a bit of a path forward for council if you choose, or a few paths forward. This would involve coming back just with the council remuneration and expense policy and just revising your comparator group. That's what you're looking for. So the information we've provided today with respect to courses and conferences, we're not actually going to be dealing with that anymore. But we could look at potentially through policy changes to add something in that talks about councillors having the ability to reallocate within their categories, because in our analysis of the work, I think there's enough, it appears as though there's enough money for council to attend a couple conferences, which was sort of the level I had thought we were trying to set it at, but that sometimes you may get caught in one category or another. So if council can allocate amongst those categories for travel and meals and courses and conferences. So that's, I guess I would take that away from this. And if any member of council or the mover thinks I've gotten it wrong, then just let me know now.
The mover thinks you've got it right.
Okay.
Okay. I guess we did. Oh, we have.
Well,
Councillor Harris?
the observation that I would make is that I think there's enough money in the budget that we as responsible elected officials can deal with that. I personally don't want a printing budget, and I don't want a promotions budget, but I'd like to use it if I need, and if I can show a need, to do something that is of benefit to the city by my involvement in something. So it's a question of, do we have the right pot of money, and then we use it in appropriate ways in accordance with the policy, so that it is totally objective as opposed to subjective relative to how we deal with these things from an expense policy standpoint. Well, I guess it's expense. So if that forms part of the review, and then we look at the municipalities that are comparable in relation to the growth boards, as you're talking about, then I don't think we're looking at a change to the budget. I think, as what I heard from Councillor Kelly, we're going to have a pot of money as opposed to 5 pots of money.
Yeah, through your worship. So I would say what we're talking about now is really no financial impact, but looking at policy related changes both in the comparator list and with council's ability to reallocate amongst its budget categories. I think this is as simple as that.
Well, let's look at the categories to begin with, and do we need the categories right now or not? And if we do, leave them on there and then allocate accordingly. And then if you decide you don't need something, then use it in a different way, obviously with the blessing of council within our policy context. And then it's not willy-nilly, and it's not secret. It's open and transparent. So that's kind of what I would expect to come out of this thing. So pot of money to do specific things.
Councillor Nguyen is next on the list.
Yeah, thanks. Just a request from administration. When this comes back, could you include in the information the amount of used budget from last year, maybe last 2 years from this council, the amount of used and unused, and it can just be a total, so we can kind of see what the threshold is that we're at. I think it could be.
Absolutely. Yep, I can do that. Thank you.
I'm on the speaking order too, so. So when this comes back, can we still talk about the amounts? And I guess one of the reasons I brought it forward is there has been no increase. In fact, I believe the previous council decreased the amount, while some of the expenses, such as hotel rooms, have increased substantially. So that's why I brought it up in the first place is, we usually, for everything else, we do a bit of a cost of living increase, and we've had no increase, and there's actually been a decrease, I believe, about 4 years ago. So are we still able to talk about the amounts at that point?
So through worship, I didn't hear that feedback from other members of council, but it will be a regular council meeting, and we can look at an option where a resolution could be passed and debated or moved and debated around the amounts.
Okay.
Yep.
Seeing no further questions, I'm going to ask Mayor Ketcher to close.
I'm good.
I'll call the vote. Where is it? No, we got it.
Your Worship, we just require Councillor Abertoye's vote.
Voted in favor.
Okay.
And that's carried unanimously.
Okay, and thank you, and I will take the chair back. All right, so the next item is, are there any councillor inquiries of administration? Not hearing any. I will take a motion to go in camera for the purposes of the item that is on FOIP. Councillor Nguyen.
I'll move that council enter closed session for matters to be discussed under the Freedom of Information and Privacy Act.
All right, thank you. I'll close the motion. Please cast your vote.
Good
Okay, and that is carried. So we will now go in camera.